Good day, everyone. We are the Group 9, and our topic is all about post-colonial criticism. So, what is post-colonial criticism? So, post-colonial criticism is a theoretical framework that analyzes literature, culture, and history through the lens of the effects of the colonization and imperialism. It examines how colonial powers have shaped the identities, cultures, and narratives of the colonized people, both and after colonial rule. The approach also addresses the ongoing consequences of the colonialism, including cultural. Colonial and post-colonial narratives refers to the stories, histories, and representations produced during and after period of colonialism. These narratives reflects the perspective of the both and the colonizer and the colonized, and they evolved response to the social, political, and cultural impacts of colonialism. So, colonial narratives. Colonial narratives are those produced by the colonizer or those influenced by colonial ideology. These narratives often reflect the interest of colonial powers and serve to justify or reinforce imperial control over colonized territories and people. So there are common characteristics of colonial narratives include number one is depiction of the colonized as other, often portray the colonized as primitive, barbaric, or exotic. This construction of the other serves to dehumanizer and colonize and justifies their domination. Colonizer often depicted indigenous peoples as needing the guidance and control of European civilization. Example, in Joseph Conrad's King of Darkness, 1899, Africa is depicted as a dark, mysterious, and dangerous place, reinforcing Western perception of the continent as the space to be civilized. Second is civilizing mission, white man's burden. Promote the idea of a civilizing mission in which colonizers believe they are bringing progress, civilization, and religion to savage peoples. This was a central justification for imperialism and conquest. Example, Rudyard Kipling poems The White Man's Burden, 1899, these ideas, suggesting that it is the moral duty of Western power to colonize and civilize non-European society. Next is, what is post-colonial narratives? So, post-colonial narratives are the responses and counter-narratives produced by those who were colonized as well as the later generations reflecting in the colonial past. These narratives aim to reclaim, challenge, and reconstruct histories and identifies effect by colonialism. So there are key characteristics of post-colonial narratives includes are reclaiming agency and voice. Post-colonial literature often seeks to give voice to those who were silenced or marginalized during colonial rule. It challenges colonial representations and promotes a more complex and diverse view of colonized people. Example, in Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart on 1958, the story is told from the perspective of an Igbo man, Okonkwo, offering an insight into African society before colonial disruption, which counters the Western narrative of Africa as the land of savagery needing civilization. So the second one is critique of colonial power and exploitation. Post-colonial narratives often highlight the violence, exploitation, and justify that occurred under colonial rule. These works critique the systems of oppression that characterize colonialism and expose the damage it caused to indigenous cultures, economics, and societies. So, example, in French Fanon's The Rich of the Earth, 1961, Fanon addresses the dehumanizing effects of colonization of the necessity of violence in the process of liberation from colonial rule. Third one is hybrid identities and cultural syncretism. Post-colonial narratives often explore the complicities of identity in the aftermath of colonialism. With the bleeding of cultures, language, and traditions due to colonization, many post-colonial works focus on the idea of hybridity, where identities are neither purely indigenous nor purely colonial but a mix of both. Example for this in Wide Sargasso Sea 1966, Jean Rice explores the identity of Antoinette Causeway, a Creole woman in post-colonial Jamaica, showcasing the tensions between colonizer and colonized within the colonial and post-colonial context. Fourth is the delivery of indigenous history and culture. Many post-colonial narratives focus on recovering and celebrating indigenous traditions, history, and knowledge systems that were suppressed or distorted by colonial powers. Example, in Season of Migration to the North 1966, Tayeb Sali addresses the impact of British colonialism in Sudan and explores themes of cultural identity and the complicities of post-colonial relationships. So, the fifth is resistance and liberation. Post-colonial narratives often depict the struggle for independence and self-determination, reflecting both the pain and the hope of the post-colonial experience. This work emphasizes the agency of colonized people and their fight against colonial system. For example, in Wat Yong's Petal of Blood 1977, the legacy of colonialism and the struggle for independence in Kenya are explored, particularly focusing on how the new post-colonial elite have perpetuated some of the injustices of the colonial period. And the last one is the new colonialism. Post-colonial narratives also critique new colonialism, where former colonial powers or new global powers continue to exert control over post-colonial nations through economic and political means. This theme explores how the legacy of colonialism persists in new forms in the globalized world. Example, in the post-colonial exotic 2007, Graham Hugan critiques how post-colonial literature is often consumed in ways that maintain colonial structure, particularly in how the exotic is marked for Western audience.
It seems you might be referring to Edward Said's Orientalism, one of his most influential work. If that the case, Orientalism in 1878 critique how Western scholar, artists, and writers have historically portrayed the Orient, the Middle East, Asia, and North Africa as exotic, backward, and inferior. Said argues that these portrayals help justify colonial dominations and shape perceptions of East in ways that persist today. Homi Bhabha's hybridity theory is a central concept in post-colonial studies, particularly in his influential work, The Location of Culture in 1994. Hybridity refers to the culture mixing that occurs when two or more cultures interact, especially in this context of colonization, migration, or globalization, rather than producing a simple combination of cultural elements. Hybridity creates new, dynamic, and often disruptive cultural forms that challenge mixed notion of identity and power.